dialogue together has been very, very helpful because we've been picking up some questions that are in our hearts, and the scriptures come clear, and we've seen that character is important, and then God shapes that character. But the real point of contact with the whole of our life is when God starts to use us. And we really want to be certain on that, but there are some dynamics about that sometimes are kind of confusing, at least in our mind. But we're dealing with a sovereign God who chooses to use us. And often, as you were saying, Tom, that God's ways are not our ways. Now, we can know that up here, but when it goes to work out in our life, we want to be able to explain it, and we want to be able to understand it all. And God has a right to say, trust means that you believe me, and when I start to use your life, you may not understand some of it, but you need to do the last thing I told you to do. And we were talking recently about the example of Joseph. And in my mind, I see God saying, Joseph, I want to put you in a very important position in Egypt. How many of us would have arranged or allowed circumstances as God did to get him there? I mean, to get him into Egypt. His brothers threw him in a pit, and then they sold him into slavery. Then he was falsely accused of raping the wife of one of the military men, thrown in prison, thrown into the inner prison. Now, some of us would have said, we've missed the will of God, because I thought he was going to put us up here with Pharaoh. But Joseph had a heart that would not be turned aside. And as best we can tell, he continued the relationship with God no matter what the circumstances were. And God had a right to arrange his life any way he wanted. But you have to believe that the God who spoke is the God who's going to bring it about. So he put him right in Pharaoh's palace, but he was in prison. But right on schedule. If God knows where you are, he can cause anybody in the world to know where you are. And Pharaoh had a dream. Who caused that dream? Well, God did. And as you read it, all of a sudden you see that God, who is sovereign, can move all the people and circumstances he wants and put you right in the presence of Pharaoh. But halfway through, we might have questioned, is God really using us? But he really was using us. And he is preparing us for that point, and especially for Joseph. Now, John, you were raising a question a bit ago that I think many people are asking. That's very important at this point of God using us, because we get very excited when God starts to use us. Mm-hmm. But then you raised a question.
I've been in a situation where I felt like I was in God's will and following His calling. Mm. But then individuals involved in that equation thwarted that from coming about and from happening. And I wonder...
Thwarted?
Yes. And so that was my perception. And so my question is, can others prevent me from experiencing and participating in God's will? And can they actually prevent me from following what God has called me to be?
You might have something in mind where some people are confused about that. Do you have an example?
Well, my example would have been a boss for an employee. It could happen between a spouse and a husband. It could happen among siblings in a family, I think. But other people they have a lot of influence perhaps in your life. And it makes you wonder if they have that much control.
If we took the scriptures and we just took Joseph's example, it would appear that the brothers were thwarting the will of God. Fortunately, we can look back. When you're standing here and you're not at the end, it would be good to take the scripture and see how many could have been turned aside. I think Joseph could have lost it all and never have been used of God the way he did if he had said, my brothers have thwarted the will of God in my life. I'm supposed to be someone important. But I think there are some very, very important truths that come to play. If we feel that people can thwart the will of God, then we don't know God as we ought to. I mean, God is a sovereign God, and when he purposes something, he will bring it about. And I think of the passage in Isaiah 15:27, the Lord of hosts has purposed, who will annul it? His hand is stretched out, and who will turn it back? A person or a circumstance has as much chance of thwarting the will of God as I would of capturing a hurricane in a paper bag. He's God. And I think of the passage in Isaiah earlier, in Isaiah 46, and listen to the context in which he is giving it. Thus saith the Lord, who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain, but formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I have not spoken in secret. I, the Lord, speak. I declare what is right. And then he goes on to say that when he speaks, no one can change it, because he's God. And so I think it is important for us to sense that when God himself sets in motion something in our life, and he's setting about to use us, how he uses us, when he uses us, and the circumstances in which he uses us will vary, and they may not look like what we had thought. But there is nobody that I know of can thwart the purpose of God. If it's an activity, people can thwart an activity, but they cannot thwart the relationship. But too many people feel called to an activity or a position or an influence. And then when someone doesn't give it to them, they feel, well, I believe that God wanted me to do this, therefore they've thwarted it. I'd say, no, God always calls you to a relationship. And no movement of people can ever thwart the relationship.
There's some good examples. I think of Daniel thrown into the lion's den because he was faithful. Or Peter, Paul, others that were thrown into prison who could have thought that their whole ministry was thwarted. Even David running around hiding in caves when he should have been king.
I think this is one that we're going to work through because it's very practical, isn't it? And we'll need to help each other to be sure that we understand nobody can thwart the purpose of God for our life.